Hello there, this is James S. Crofty, 1978, with just a brief disclaimer before we begin today, explaining that when I'd almost finished recording the script for the following video, having believed that I'd seen every single episode of the original Sailor Moon anime, only when it was too late did I realise that there were another 2 seasons left to watch. But although I've seriously considered scrapping the following video because there's no way in hell that I'm going to force myself to sit through another 2 seasons, nothing that I've read in any of the gushing fan articles, such as the one linked down at the underbar, give any indication that there were relevant or significant changes to the formula or character developments during the last 2 seasons that would render my opinion null and void. On the contrary, in fact, not only are most, if not all, of the examples given to support the claim that Sailor Moon is the best role model ever from the first 3 seasons, at least as far as I can tell, but the way that the author makes a point of actively apologising for, defending and otherwise attempting to excuse the glaring issues with the characters and anime as a whole in every other paragraph further reinforces the core thesis of the following video, that even if there were developments which render some of my points moot in the final 2 seasons, just as I argued in my video discussing the character of Mako Mori in Pacific Rim, which was made 2 decades later by the way, our media is still so patriarchal, heteronormative and unwittingly misogynistic that in their desperate search for representation and role models, female fans in particular will eagerly convince themselves, metaphorically speaking, that ball lightning is actually a UFO. But in short there, my friends, if you believe that the fact I haven't watched every single episode of the original anime, let alone read the manga and so forth, renders my opinion null and void, or are otherwise so invested in Sailor Moon that you perceive any critique of her status, or that of Neptune and Uranus in particular as role models and icons, as a personal attack against you, then please feel free to click away from this video now. Hello there, this is James S. Crofty, 1978, and having now finally forced myself to sit through all 3 original seasons of Sailor Moon with English subtitles, I can finally respond to the article linked down to underbar by agreeing that yes, Sailor Moon probably is at least one of the best role models ever for young girls in particular, along with Buffy Summers in Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Mako Mori, who I've already critiqued in the videos linked down to underbar, but that far from being a reason to celebrate, however, feminists and reasonable people everywhere should be genuinely outraged by this reality, because the fact that Sailor Moon is one of the greatest fictional role models for young girls ever created, solely because she's not an entirely weak, helpless, pathetic and irritating damsel in distress, sex object or love interest who exists solely for the pleasure and or benefit of men, is merely evidence that our society is still so patriarchal and misogynistic to its very core that when, as a group, young girls in particular receive a metaphorical slap in the face instead of a kick in the teeth, we honestly believe that it's a victory. Before I continue though, I feel compelled to add the disclaimer that I am not now, nor have I ever been, a 12-year-old girl or questioning my sexuality or gender, so I'm fully aware that this series was never meant for me, and that maybe everything I'm about to condemn is a necessary part of reaching out to and making a real connection with preteen girls in particular, and young people who were questioning their sexuality and gender in the early 90s. But even leaving aside my problem with the fact that most episodes were so mind-numbingly formulaic and repetitive that they may as well have been cut from the series altogether, with the disposable underling of the week employing or creating the monster of the week to steal some energy or what have you from humans, the Sailor Senshi fighting that monster, almost being defeated by it, Tuxedo Mask suavely and handsomely intervening to save them in the nick of time, like the dashing prince is supposed to do in fairy tales for little girls, and Sailor Moon, who had never done anything useful in the fight before that point because she had no ability or power beyond using the weapon which destroys the creature in one hit to end the battle, while it just stands there, uses that weapon to save the day. Seriously, just give the weapon to one of the other Sailor Senshi who can actually fight and retire, for the love of the great holy donkey, and then everyone learns the lesson of the week, as well as leaving aside my problem with the utter absurdity of the fact that simply wearing their Sailor Senshi uniform instead of normal clothes was supposed to conceal their identities. Quick, Asagi-chan, use your power before the enemy arrives. How did you know that I was Asagi?
Come on, Sarge, it's your turn.
Oh, well.
Where's he gone? Where's the Sarge?
Sarge.
What have you done with the Sarge?
Leave him. Come here.
It was me!
Come on, is our society still so systemically and institutionally patriarchal and misogynistic that a character such as Sailor Moon is not only the best that we can possibly do even now, 2 decades later, but actively applauded and celebrated as one of the greatest fictional female role models of all time? If so, then it's one of the top 10 reasons why aliens will not talk to us. In many ways, of course, Sailor Moon was the prototype of Buffy the Vampire Slayer, with the first season of each series in particular using fighting supernatural monsters as a framing device to teach young teenagers about important social issues. But while the first season of Buffy at least warned kids about the dangers of sexual predators, both online and in real life, as well as violence against children committed by their guardians, Sailor Moon was focused on much more important social issues for young girls, such as looking young, staying thin, adorable pets, pretty jewellery, and the overriding importance of finding a handsome prince and getting married, because remember, throughout all 3 seasons of Sailor Moon, Usagi's sole ambition was to marry Mamuro, aka Tuxedo Mask, who, as I mentioned before, always showed up to save her and the other weak and helpless little girls and make a benevolently sexist pronouncement about not forgiving anyone who hurt the feelings of pure and delicate maidens, or before they became a couple, longing to marry the blonde guy who worked at the video arcade. On top of which, Asagi was also lazy, greedy, irritating, stupid, and unbelievably petty and childish, feeling jealous of a much younger girl because she was quote-unquote in love with her Mamo-chan as well, and as I mentioned earlier, without her weapons to deliver the final blow to the monster of the week, was utterly defenceless and useless in a fight, relying entirely on, as Severus Snape put it when describing Harry Potter, a combination of blind luck and more talented friends. After all, Sailor Mercury was vastly more intelligent and studious, Sailor Venus was the most experienced, working alone to save the world for months or even years before the others even became Sailor Senshi, and becoming so famous in the process that she was made the star of a video game. Sailor Mars had psychic powers and an understanding of Shinto rituals which were useful in fighting off certain enemies, and Sailor Jupiter was a physically strong martial artist who, while perpetually pining after the guy who broke her heart, could easily beat up men twice her size, while Usagi was the ultimate female example of the mediocre dude saves the world trope, becoming Sailor Moon and the leader of the group for literally no other reason than because it was her destiny, apparently because kindness, compassion, and a supposedly pure heart makes up for absolutely everything else. For the love of the great holy donkey, even Mako, Mori and Buffy's Summers could actually fight, but on the other hand, at least Sailor Moon didn't spend 5 seasons whining about wanting to be a normal girl, or the entire movie torn between her new love interest and her surrogate daddy, so on that score, the 3 of them are more or less tied. But getting back to the point of this video, however, while I understand how vital it is for entertainment aimed at children and younger teenagers in particular to show them that you don't have to have a natural talent or otherwise be exceptional in order to achieve greatness, would it honestly have killed the character's popularity for the series to have shown Asagi starting off as a boy-crazy little crybaby who never studied, failed every test and exam, and whose only ambition in life was to marry her Prince Charming, growing and developing into a young woman who, while never coming close to their level, learned from Sailor Mercury how best to study and to focus her mind, studied hard enough and did well enough to get into a good high school, learned to defend herself and actually be of use in battle from Sailor Jupiter, and while still longing to marry Mamuro, also wanted her own life and career. Of course it wouldn't have, but as I say though, the problem is that as a society, we are still so rooted in patriarchal culture and gender norms, and therefore so desperate for anything that will make even the slightest and most insignificant chink in their armour, that we will happily swallow down horse manure and insist that it's ice cream. Speaking of which, this brings me on to the sacred cow of Sailor Neptune and Sailor Uranus, and before I continue, if you haven't already done so, then I ask that you please watch my video discussing Cardcaptor Sakura, also linked down as the underbar, in the hopes that it will dispel any false assumptions which you may be tempted to use as the basis of an ad hominem, because to put it bluntly, my friends, regardless of their age, once again bearing in mind my praise of and admiration for Cardcaptor Sakura, I'd be much more inclined to believe that Hotaru and Chibiusa were romantically in love with each other than to believe that Uranus and Neptune ever were. Which is not to say, I hasten to add, that they were never intended to be. However, having watched every uncut episode of the third season in the original Japanese, but with English subtitles, so it's possible that something was lost in translation, and having only dragged myself through the third season instead of giving up on it entirely, specifically because I was waiting for Neptune and Uranus to do something that would make their relationship and or their sexuality clear, the irony is that if the people who dubbed the series for American audiences deliberately edited and rewrote it to cover up their sexuality and or romantic relationship, then they honestly needn't have bothered. Because no different from Sailor Moon's epic role model status, the character's lesbian relationship, in inverted commas, was largely in their heads, just as it exists almost solely in the minds of most of Sailor Moon's fans. Before anyone types a comment, though, arguing that they were obviously a lesbian couple, so I merely blinkered and ignorant, rather than explaining how far from winning the couples contest, having stated at the beginning that they were merely posing as a couple in order to go undercover, Neptune and Uranus only got as far as they did because they had some kind of psychic link, and dropped out of the contest specifically because they believed that real love should win, how Uranus literally left Neptune behind to die in one episode without a second thought or a backwards glance, and I don't care how devoted you are to the mission, if you love someone, then you at least hesitate, how Uranus actually stated at one point that their relationship went beyond romantic and sexual relationships, and bearing that in mind, how in earlier episodes the two of them had talked about love and relationships as if they were a petty human concern that was beneath them because they were focused entirely on their mission, on top of which how, as I explained in my video Schrödinger's author, also links below, appealing to the fact that the creator of the manga or someone else behind the series intended for them to be or declared that they were a lesbian or at the very least queer couple makes you a hypocrite if you ever declare this authorial intent is irrelevant in any other argument, and how every argument you can ever make about how Hotaru and Chibiusa were merely friends who shared a profound emotional bond and thus cared deeply about one another applies equally to Neptune and Uranus. When all is said and done, my friends, whether or not they actually were or ever intended to be lesbians, a romantic couple, or a romantic lesbian couple, because remember, those things are not dependent upon one another, is entirely irrelevant, because once again, going back to the entire point of this video, if they were a lesbian couple in the third season, which was most fans' only experience of the characters when they decided that they were gay, then the only reason to praise them as icons and role models was that they were a couple of inches further away from being so deep in the closet that they were finding Christmas presents. And yet, young queer girls and women in particular were and still are so desperate for representation and role models with whom they can identify that they will, metaphorically speaking, look at a grainy photo of a man in a monkey suit walking through the forest and declare it to be evidence of Bigfoot. Indeed, having genuinely applauded Cardcaptor Sakura and Persona 4 as examples of the exploration of sexuality and gender identity which the rest of the world should emulate, I cannot tell you how disappointed I was by the unbelievably subtle hints and innuendo that are hailed as the relationship between Neptune and Uranus, genuinely causing me to wonder why they are held up as queer and in particular lesbian anime icons when, as I indicated before, Chibiusa showed far more genuine affection for Hotaru than Uranus ever showed for Neptune in the third season, with Chibiusa risking her life for her friend, while Uranus never shed a tear, even for the brief time when Neptune was dead, because finding the talismans was all that mattered. And as a brief side note, in fact, they really should have stayed dead after Uranus committed suicide, because having been willing to kill as many people as it took to save the world, the fact that they were the ones who had to die and that they were willing to kill themselves was their atonement and redemption and a perfect conclusion to their story arc. But of course, no good guys are allowed to die in the Sailor Moon universe, and so they were brought back to life and spent the rest of the series being shoehorned in as the writers struggled to find a role and a purpose for them. Beyond the debate over their sexuality, however, raising a much more important social topic, the fact that the only thing even remotely feminine about Uranus's gender expression was the Sailor Uranus uniform and makeup honestly led me to wonder why countless fans weren't convinced that he was a trans man, or at the very least genderqueer, and that Neptune was in love with him. Something that would have not only fit the character far better, but would have also been infinitely more progressive and had a far greater impact upon society than merely declaring that they're a lesbian couple because reasons. But don't worry though, because it never has any impact upon the story of any kind beyond a few silly jokes and raised eyebrows. And naturally, the answer to that question is the same as it is to the questions of why is Asagi champion as a role model and icon, why don't more people assume that Neptune and Uranus are bi or pan or any other sexual or gender identity instead of merely lesbian, or why hasn't the Sailor Moon fandom shipped Hotaru and Chibiusa yet, which is that it all depends entirely upon what the audience feels and desires. At the end of the day then, regardless of how much evidence may refute or support this assertion, Uranus and Neptune are a lesbian, or at the very least queer couple, because the fans want them to be, either because they're shipping, which is another reason why aliens won't talk to us, or because, once again, they are so desperate for strong lesbian role models that they'll swear a creaking floorboard is actually evidence that the house is haunted. And the reason why they never stop to consider that Uranus could be a trans man, Neptune could be intersex, one or both of them could be asexual, or any of the other countless possibilities, is that our society is still so trapped in the monosexual and gender binary mindset that even as progressives, many of us still slip into assuming that, okay, they must be a couple because they care so much about each other, apparently, and spend all of their time together, and the butch one must be the man in the relationship, utterly ignoring the entire kaleidoscope of sexuality, gender, and relationships which exist, just as we assume that a strong, in inverted commas, female character is only strong in the most literal sense of the term, fighting like a man, but still a woman, i.e. weak and emotional underneath, or still has to be a Barbie doll whose only dream and ambition is to marry her particular Prince Charming. So in conclusion, my friends, the reason why I'm making this video is to ask all of us, please, for the love of the great holy donkey, to open our minds and raise the bar even just a little higher. Because although a spin-off anime focused entirely on Neptune and Uranus, who were, remember, unbelievably capable, successful, and talented in their normal lives, depicting their lesbian relationship openly and honestly, would be infinitely superior to the original Sailor Moon, not least because they would be far superior role models compared to Asagi, it would still be merely another example of the strong female character trope, and the only reason that they would be a lesbian couple would be because it would boost the ratings, whereas if Uranus was indeed a trans man in such a spin-off series struggling to come to terms with his gender identity in a society that condemns and demonizes him for being transgender, while still fighting to protect the world that condemns him as a superhero alongside the woman who he loves and who loves him equally, accepting him as a man, being the only person who does so. Hang on a second, I need to write that down. That's actually pretty damn good.
And all the girlies say I'm pretty fly for a white guy.